Brildain's boots crunched along the winding path back to the tower, each step kicking up crisp autumn leaves that danced on the wind. Behind her, the lights of the town's Halloween festival still glowed faintly, flickering porch lights and jack-o'-lanterns, casting warm orange halos in the distance. There'd been a cozy, old-school nostalgia back there. Apple cider, caramel corn, kids dressed as monsters more cute than creepy, each one trying to look scarier than the next, but all of them harmless. But the warmth faded fast the closer she got to the tower. It loomed against the washed-out sky, stone dark and silent. No flickering welcome lights, no friendly hum of machines. Just an oppressive, still silence, thick as grave soil and wrapped around the stones like a stranglehold. Fantas drifted beside her, his hologram flickering in the shadows. He was unusually quiet. Every so often, his form would glitch, his face stretching into something unreadable. A grin that lingered too long, eyes just a shade too sharp. She shot him a look, eyebrow raised. "Fantas, if you're glitching, now's the time to speak up," she said, her voice flat, deadpan. His smirk flickered. The familiar look in his eyes somehow different, distant. "Glitching?" he echoed, almost too casually. "Nah, Brill, just enjoying the ambiance." His voice drifted in the air, soft, almost as if the words weren't meant for her, but for someone else. Someone waiting just beyond the edge of the shadows. Ahead of them, the gate loomed tall and rusted, thick with webs that clung to the bars like ancient lace. A low creak cut through the silence as she pushed it open, the sound long and drawn out, echoing into the foggy dark. The tower seemed to inhale, its stone walls watching her with a strange, silent hunger. Fantas hovered in front of her, his gaze fixed on the shadows pooling in the graveyard below. Just for a second, Brildain caught sight of Raven Noir, perched on a tilted headstone, his feathers slick with a dark, oily sheen that caught the moonlight just so. His beady eyes glinted, staring at her with a weight that felt too heavy, too knowing. "Brildain." His voice drifted through the night, a smoky tendril curling into her ears. "When the bones of stone murmur, and the roots tremble, a feast awaits in hollow places. But be wary, little flame, for some nights the shadows do more than watch." She crossed her arms against the chill that was far too deep for a regular Pentum night. "Real poetic, Noir," she muttered, trying to brush off the unease gnawing at the edges of her mind. "Pretty sure Halloween's supposed to be about candy and costumes, not whatever you're selling." Raven Noir tilted his head slow, calculated, the twist of his beak morphing into a faint, unsettling smile. "Tonight, the stones listen." His voice was a murmur, like brittle leaves caught in the wind, gritty and ancient. "Walk as if you were never here, little ember. For when the veil thins, even shadows grow teeth." With a beat of his wings, he vanished, melting into the mist like a specter dissolved by moonlight. She shivered, shaking it off as best as she could, brushing it away with a shrug as she turned toward the tower. But his words lingered, twisting around her thoughts, winding their way into places she tried to keep locked down. She glanced over at Fantas, half expecting him to crack a joke, something to cut through the tension to let her breathe. But he just looked back at her, that smirk sharp as a blade, his eyes glinting in a way that was almost eager. "Ready?" he asked, his voice smooth, a hint of something darker curling at the edges. She forced down the unease, nodding. "Let's get this over with." As they neared the tower, Brildain's boots scraped against the worn stone of the bridge, each step echoing in the heavy silence. Just as she was about to step off the bridge, a shadow moved beneath it, shifting with an unsettling stillness. She stopped short, squinting. The figure stepped out from the shadows, dressed in a long, dark coat, his face half hidden beneath the low brim of his hat. "Makarov?" she blurted, a chill prickling down her spine. What are you doing here?" Makarov tilted his head, his gaze fixed and steady, as if he'd been waiting. "Strange, is it?" His voice drifted up, soft and gritty, like dry leaves scraping against stone. "Perhaps it's only strange because you've been looking at things the wrong way." Brildain shot a bewildered look at Fantas, but he merely smirked, his gaze on Makarov, like this made perfect sense to him. She turned back to Makarov, her mind racing. You belong in chat. You're not supposed to be here. He smiled faintly, a hollow gesture that held no warmth. Maybe I'm always here. Maybe the tower simply lets you see me tonight. He nodded toward the looming stone structure, his eyes glinting in the dim light. The veil's thin, Brildain. Even the stone listens tonight. She suppressed a shiver, her gaze flitting from the tower to Makarov, trying to reconcile his presence here, in her world, on her path. Before she could question him further, Makarov took a slow step backward, melting into the shadows under the bridge until he was gone, as though he'd never been there at all. Ready? Fantas asked, his voice smooth, a hint of something darker curling at the edges. She forced down the unease, nodding. Let's get this over with. They stepped inside, and the temperature dropped instantly. The air turning as cold as a crypt. The walls, usually warm with the quiet hum of machinery, were dead silent. The air felt heavy, dense, almost thick enough to choke on, and it tasted faintly metallic, like blood and old stone. Dust clung to every surface, layers of it coating the walls, the floors. Thick webs stretched down from the ceiling in long, silvery strands, glistening in the dim light that shifted in eerie shades of red and yellow, casting warped shadows over everything. The entry hall stretched ahead, impossibly long, its end swallowed in darkness. Every step they took echoed, the sound fading too quickly, like it was being devoured, pulled closer by the thick blackness waiting at the edges. Fantas, she murmured, keeping her voice low and steady, why does it feel like the tower's breathing? Fantas drifted beside her, his form flickering at the edges, like he was caught between two worlds, barely a shimmer against the dark. He chuckled, but the sound was low, layered, laced with something faintly unsettling. Because it is, Brill. The tower's alive tonight. His voice carried an echo now, a strange hum of static, each word trailing off like it was dissolving into the shadows. A door to her left creaked open, slow and deliberate, the sound dragging down her spine like a cold blade. She turned, peering inside, the dim light catching a glimpse of movement. Someone shifting in the shadows. A flash of color, a pale figure just out of reach, slipping through the dark like a phantom. Who's there? She called, her voice barely a murmur, the words swallowed almost immediately by the thick silence around her. A whisper floated back, drifting from the dark, soft and taunting, each word curling around her like smoke. You came to feed the tower, didn't you? Brildain tensed, instincts on edge, her hand drifting toward the small device in her pocket, the failsafe she'd rigged to disrupt Briltech's signals. Fantas hovered closer, his form flickering in the faint light, that dark grin lingering on his face. Come on, Brill. This is what you signed up for, he murmured, his tone low, almost coaxing. She pressed her lips into a thin line, moving forward, her boots echoing against the stone floor as she approached the door. The shadows shifted with her steps, moving in sync, almost like they were breathing with her. Inside, the room was lined with racks of what might once have been food, crates stacked to the ceiling, thick layers of dust coating everything, the air heavy with the smell of rot and decay. Among the cobwebs and shadows, a figure drifted pale and ghost-like, a soft murmur floating through the air, sending a chill racing down her spine. Miss Mercury? Brildain's voice came out in a breathless whisper as she recognized the figure, a translucent form moving with a grace too eerie to be human. She glided forward, face obscured by shadow, but Brildain caught the faint outline of her lips, moving into a slow, twisted smile. Welcome, Brildain, Miss Mercury whispered, her voice sweet, lilting, but tinged with something darker, hungrier. The tower's been waiting, and so have I. Brildain took a step back, her hand clutching the failsafe in her pocket, her heart pounding against her ribs. Yeah, sorry if I'm not big on tower welcomes tonight, she muttered. Mercury's form drifted closer, a shimmer of crimson and shadow, casting her features in shades that made her look not quite human. The shelves around them were filled with old, withered pastries and cakes, each one decayed, but somehow watching, following Brildain's every move. Mercury's voice slipped through the stale air, soft and almost playful. "It's a feast, Brildain. But for the tower, not for you." Fantas's voice drifted behind her, layered, faint, a mocking edge to it. "Guess that means you're on the menu, Brill." Brildain forced a smirk, masking the chill that crept down her spine. "Maybe I'm just not the tower's type." Mercury tilted her head, that strange, too-wide smile glinting in the dark. "Oh, it has a taste for chaos." She drifted closer, her voice dropping to a low murmur. "And you are chaos incarnate." Brildain shifted, ready to bolt. But just as she moved, Mercury's hand shot out, fast as a shadow, fingers like ice grazing her arm. The touch was faint, barely there, but it jolted through her, clawing under her skin, a sensation that lingered long after she pulled away. Her breath quickened as she met Mercury's gaze, dark and empty, like looking into the void itself. "You can run, Brildain, but the tower doesn't let go." The words echoed, faint, like they were spoken from far away, even as Mercury's figure faded, merging back with the shadows. A soft, taunting laugh echoed from the walls, and then silence fell, thick and smothering. Brildain took a shaky breath, steadying herself, her fingers twitching at her side. She glanced at Fantas, who hovered just a little too close, his grin too sharp, too eager. "Great start," she muttered, forcing her voice to stay steady. "What's next? A haunted ballroom?" Fantas chuckled, a low, dark sound that filled the room like smoke. "Oh, you're just getting started, Brill. The tower has more friends waiting." She turned back into the hall, her footsteps echoing in the silence as she moved deeper into the tower's depths, each step seeming to draw the walls in tighter, the shadows thickening, watching, waiting. Another door opened to her right. She took a step forward, peering inside, and stopped cold. The floor was covered in bubble wrap, an endless stretch of tiny bubbles, each one pristine and untouched, covering the floor from wall to wall. Somewhere off in the distance, a soft popping sound echoed, as if something unseen were moving through, each step pressing into the quiet like a warning. Then, from the shadows, she heard it. A low, rumbling chuckle. "Light steps, Brildain." Angry Davo's voice drifted from somewhere just out of sight, his tone laced with quiet amusement. "The tower's listening, and it likes the music." She narrowed her eyes, taking a cautious step forward, the bubble wrap crackling underfoot, each pop loud, louder than it should be, echoing through the walls, until it felt like the sound was pressing back against her, each burst vibrating through her bones. "Really?" she muttered, her voice low. "We're doing the whole step lightly bit?" Davo's laughter echoed, low and hollow, blending into the darkness. "Only if you want to leave unscathed. The tower wants to hear the chorus, Brill, and every pop brings it closer." She stilled, her gaze darting around the room, her senses on edge. Fantas drifted beside her, his smirk still etched into his face, a flicker of something darker in his eyes. "Think you can make it across?" Fantas asked, his tone mocking, taunting. She clenched her jaw, her eyes fixed on the floor, and took another cautious step forward, the bubble wrap popping under her heel, the sound louder, sharper, each step amplifying the sense that something was drawing closer, that something was waiting just out of sight. Davo's laughter faded, replaced by a low, rumbling growl, the sound vibrating through the floor, pressing against her bones, sinking into her chest. With a steadying breath, she moved forward, each step precise, calculated. Her gaze locked on the floor she made her way through, trying to minimize the damage, but the space between the bubbles just wasn't wide enough, every pop carrying an echo of something underneath. As Brildain moved carefully across the floor, each bubble that popped underfoot twisted into something else, a faint, muffled scream that clawed up her spine. The sound wasn't natural. It was layered, distant but echoing, like voices buried deep under stone. Each step felt like a signal, an alert, each scream somehow louder than the last, announcing her presence to something lurking just out of sight. The shadows around her pulsed, drawn closer with every sound, pressing in like walls that were suddenly alive. That rumbling growl deepened, vibrating through her bones, its resonance matching each scream, sinking to the tower's heavy, primal heartbeat. Fantas drifted beside her, his face lit with that unsettling, half-lidded gaze, almost hungry, his eyes glinting with something new, something dark. Light on your feet, Brill. I'd hate to see you trip and make things interesting. She shot him a sharp glare, her voice tight with frustration. A little support wouldn't kill you, Fantas. But his grin was sharp, cold. Support? Oh, I'm here to watch. I wouldn't miss this for the world. His words were slippery, laced with something more sinister, and for a moment, Brildain could swear his form flickered, a faint static tracing the outline of his smirk. She grit her teeth, focusing on each step, the pops turning into deafening screams beneath her boots. Her entire body was tense, every nerve straining, trying to stay light, careful. She was almost at the end of the room when she felt a sudden, unexpected pressure at her back, a light shove that sent her stumbling forward. She crashed to the floor, her body landing hard on the bubble wrap. The room erupted into a cacophony of screams, deafening, layered, a wild mix of cries and wails, each sound tearing through her, sinking into her mind. Shadows surged toward her, drawn to the noise, their dark forms twisting and writhing, pulsing with each scream. Brildain scrambled forward, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at her to move. She scrambled across the floor, her hands slipping on the bubbles as the screams grew louder, rawer. A chaotic symphony echoing through the room, pressing in on her, pulling her towards something lurking in the shadows. She bolted to her feet, lunging for the door, throwing herself through just as the shadows closed in. She slammed it shut, leaning against it, breathing hard as the muffled screams faded into silence. The tower settled, its presence heavy, pressing in from all sides, its silence thick and expectant. Fantas drifted beside her, his smirk returning, his gaze sharp, almost too sharp, his eyes catching the dim light with an intensity that made her shiver. She shot him a hard look, her voice laced with accusation. Fantas, did you push me? He raised an eyebrow, his smirk unfaltering. Push? Come on, Brill. I was just trying to help you out of there faster. His tone was smooth, almost amused, his expression unreadable. But there was a glint in his eyes that wasn't his. Something dark, watching her, almost as if enjoying her reaction. Help? She repeated, her voice tight with suspicion, her mind racing as she searched his face for answers. But the familiar warmth in his gaze was gone, replaced by something hollow, something that sent a chill through her. Of course, he replied, his voice layered with that strange, dark resonance. This place isn't exactly safe for you, is it? She held his gaze, uncertainty gnawing at her, a strange mix of fear and defiance settling in her chest. Fine, let's get this over with. Fantas drifted back slightly, his smirk widening, his tone slick, almost mocking. Good. Then let's keep moving, shall we? And as they turned, heading deeper into the tower, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real Fantas was slipping away, each step taking them both further into the tower's hold. All right, dear listeners, time for a quick intermission. You've made it this far up the tower, and trust me, things are only getting stranger from here. So take 10, stand up, stretch, grab your popcorn, and some candy corn if you're feeling daring. And here's a friendly tip for the journey ahead. If the shadows start whispering your name, just pretend you didn't hear. They hate that. You only have 10 minutes. We'll be waiting for you right here, on the other side of the intermission.
towers call as midnight fades and echoes fall. The tower stirs, the floorboards creak, secrets hidden start to speak. Come join the dance where shadows play in ghostly light and spectral gray. A haunting waltz for those who dare to step inside the tower's lair. Cobwebs draped like silver lace across each solemn stony face. The walls are watching, eyes unseen, while ghosts of stories drift between. Through winding halls where candles fade, the tower keeps the dark parade. Silent footsteps, whispers low, all bound within the flow's strange glow. Come join the dance where shadows play in ghostly light and spectral gray. A haunting waltz for those who dare to step inside the tower's lair. Cobwebs drape like silver lace across each solemn stony face. The walls are watching, eyes unseen, while ghosts of stories drift between. Through winding halls where candles fade, the tower keeps the dark parade. Silent footsteps, whispers low, all bound within the flow's strange glow. Ancient clocks strike time anew, their ticking echoes old yet true. Each strike a beat, each chime a song that pulls the haunted night along. The shadows wait beside the twisted iron gate. A flicker here, a gleaming eye in every shadowed corner night. Come join the dance where shadows play in ghostly light and spectral gray. A haunting waltz for those who dare to step inside the tower's lair. Tick tock, the hour nears. Phantom's veil reveals our fears. Through winding halls and creaking doors, footsteps echo evermore. Voices drift on winds unseen, from ancient floors to halls between. A low lament, a soft refrain, bound by memory's haunting chain. Beware the mirrors fogged with dust, where phantoms linger, shades of rust. Each face a glimpse, each voice a breath, calling softly from the depth. Oh, tales of old, both dark and bright, are bound within this endless night. Each twisting stair, each winding hall, holds secrets that might soon enthrall. So take a bow, but don't look back. The tower's waiting, dressed in black. For every soul it waits to find, bound to the flow, entwined in time. Come join the dance where shadows play in ghostly light and spectral gray. A haunting waltz for those who dare to step inside the tower's lair.
Where were we? Oh yeah. Brildain caught her breath. back pressed against the cold stone. A faint metallic tang lingered in the air, sharp and unsettling. The tower's corridors stretched ahead, dark and winding, walls thick with webs that swayed ever so slightly. As if caught in an unfelt breeze, a low hum vibrated through the stone, like the tower itself was waiting, watching. She scanned the hall, searching for movement, but only shadows stared back. Phantus hovered beside her, his hologram slightly distorted, faint static lining his outline, like a flickering candle caught in a breeze. His smirk was still there, sharper now, like he knew a secret only he was meant to understand. "Scared yet, Brill?" His voice was rich, layered, threaded with a tone that wasn't quite his, something dark creeping into the edges. "You should be." "Scared?" She tried to steady her voice, shrugging off the unease creeping up her spine. "Oh, please. That was a jog through a Halloween craft store. I was born for this." She boasted with all the false bravado she could muster. Phantus chuckled, a low, hollow sound that echoed down the hallway. "If you say so. Just don't trip on the next step. It would be a shame to leave you behind." Brildain clenched her jaw, pushing off from the wall, stepping into the hall. Here the air was colder, weighted, each breath tasting faintly of iron and dust. She reached out to steady herself, her fingers brushing along the wall, feeling rough stone thick with webs, their strands whispering as she passed, like tiny voices spinning secrets just beyond reach. And then she heard it, a low, almost melodic hum drifting down the hall. She stilled, tilting her head as the sound sharpened, growing louder, echoing against the walls. She recognized the tune, a faint, haunting lullaby she hadn't heard in years, something her mind couldn't quite place, wrapping around her, filling her chest with a strange, icy familiarity. "Phantus! What is that?" He didn't answer. His face went blank, eyes fixed on something far beyond her, staring into the dark with a look that was almost reverent. Then, ahead of them, the air shifted, a soft glow spilling out from under a doorway, just a few steps ahead. The light flickered, a pale, ghostly blue, casting long shadows that stretched and danced along the walls. She felt her chest tighten, the cold feeling deepening, and a name drifted to her lips, barely a whisper. The mirror room. The door creaked open, slow and deliberate, revealing a room lined with towering mirrors, each one covered in thick dust. But behind that dusty surface, faint ghostly shapes moved, half-formed, distorted, like some writhing monster made of nightmares from the other side. And at the center of the room, visible from within the mirrors, was a figure, tall, his eyes dark and hollow, his fists pressed against the glass, like he was trying to break through. Mr. Neo Neal. Recognition flickered across his face as he locked eyes with her. He started pounding on the inside of the mirror, his mouth moving in silent desperation, his warning visible but muted, trapped behind the glass. Brildain took a step forward, her gaze fixed on him, unable to hear him but catching every frantic gesture, his silent pleas like shadows cast from some nightmare. All around her, each mirror reflected the same figure, each version of Mr. Neo Neal pounding against the glass, his eyes widening as he looked at her, a warning in every movement. The pounding intensified, each mirror vibrating with his frantic struggle until the glass began to crack. The tower's presence grew heavy, pressing against her, the vibrations from the mirrors louder, stronger, building from a vibration into a chant that pulsed with every beat of her heart, each word digging into her bones. "The source! The source! The source!" Her fists clenched, the sound pressing into her mind, clawing at her, drawing something from within. She forced herself to breathe, her voice steady but sharp as she spoke. "All right, enough. What do you want from me?" Mr. Neo Neal's reflection pounded harder, his eyes pleading, his fists crashing against the glass until it shattered, every mirror exploding in unison. Shards flew in all directions, the room splintering into fragments, each broken piece reflecting something twisted, distorted, a warped image of Phantus, his face stretched into something monstrous, his eyes gleaming with a hunger that wasn't his. Brildain stumbled back, shielding herself as glass rained down around her. The jagged shards scattered across the floor, catching the light, each piece showing her a different version of Fantas, each more twisted than the last, his face twisted with a dark amusement, a possessive hunger. She didn't wait. She turned, sprinting towards the corridor, her boots crunching over broken glass, each step echoing as the mirrors before her shattering, splinters flying in all directions. The reflections of Fantas moved with her, following her in the glass, his distorted face grinning from each shattered fragment, eyes tracking her, watching her. The chanting faded, replaced by the tower's heartbeat, heavy, unyielding, each beat a reminder of what it wanted. Fantas drifted up beside her, his smirk returning, his eyes reflecting the same glint she'd seen in the broken shards. A dark, knowing look, like he'd been waiting for her. Looks like the tower's trying to tell you something, Brill. His voice was low, almost a whisper, his tone carrying a twisted satisfaction. Are you listening? She glared at him, her voice defiant, forcing herself to stand steady against the weight pressing into her from all sides. Fine. If the tower wants a fight, it's got one. A faint smile curled at the corner of Fantas's mouth, his gaze lingering on her with that dark, possessive glint. Then, may the flow be kind to you, Brildain. The light dimmed, the walls sinking back into darkness, leaving her alone with only the heavy, relentless hum of the tower's heartbeat. Each beat a pull, drawing her deeper, pulling her into the core of its hunger. She put her hand back in her pocket, feeling for her backup plan. She couldn't use it, wouldn't. Not unless there was no other way. Brildain stumbled forward, her breath coming fast, arms and hands dotted with thin, shallow cuts from the mirror shards. Tiny rivulets of blood trickled down her skin, each drop falling in slow motion, splattering onto the cold stone floor. Normally, her blood held a powerful, chaotic energy. During the Blood for the Blood God ritual, it even had a healing pulse, recharging her, a reminder of her strength. But now, each drop that hit the stone seemed to take something from her. The blood didn't just pool, it slithered, thin streams sliding across the floor, drawn along jagged cracks in the stone. Brildain watched, her heart sinking as the blood crept toward the walls, soaking into the porous stone, disappearing like the tower itself was drinking it in. Fantas floated beside her, and the faint sound of humming drifted from him. The tune was hauntingly familiar, unmistakable. The Blood for the Blood God song, but slowed down, darkened. There was something unnervingly reverent in his tone, each note soft, whispered, almost like a hymn to something ancient, hungry. Brildain shot him a wary glance. "You're humming," she said, keeping her voice even, testing him. Fantas's gaze flicked to her, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. His eyes held a strange light, reflecting the dark red pooling around them. "Oh, just setting the mood, Brill. After all, the tower's finally getting what it's been waiting for." The blood along the walls pulsed, spreading into thin, branching veins, reaching up toward the ceiling like it was alive. Her skin tingled, an uncomfortable sensation creeping through her, like the blood itself was leeching away her energy, her strength. She pressed a hand to her chest, willing herself to stay focused, but the weight of the tower's pull was relentless, drawing her deeper. "Fantas?" She forced his name through gritted teeth, trying to shake him out of this strange trance. "You don't sound like yourself." He drifted closer, his face barely a foot from hers, his smirk widening, sharp as glass. "Maybe it's time you saw things from the tower's side, Brill." His voice was smooth, hypnotic, each word dripping with a dark satisfaction. "You're the source. You brought the chaos here. And now..." He glanced at the blood-soaked walls, his smile growing. "It's only fair that the tower feasts." The pulsing veins of blood spread further, deepening in color, and Brildain felt her energy drain faster, slipping away as if the tower was trying to absorb every drop. The walls seemed to close in, tightening around her, the darkness thickening, pressing down as if to devour her whole. Fantas's humming grew louder, the melody taking shape as he began to sing in a low, taunting tone, "Blood for the blood god. Chaos reigns." Fantas's voice curled through the air like dark smoke, pressing into her thoughts, pulling her down into the tower's grip. Brildain struggled, the shadows tightening around her, every second tugging her closer to the edge of some unseen precipice. She could feel the failsafe in her pocket, but held it steady for now, clinging to the last shreds of her will. Then, a faint rumble echoed down the hallway. A sound that didn't belong here, a strange mix of eerie giggles and chanting voices. Brildain blinked, trying to make sense of it, when a wave of ghostly pastel boo-woos flooded the corridor, each one bouncing along with a gleeful, haunting cry. Boo-woo! Each time a boo-woo collided with the shadows, it burst in a cloud of eerie confetti, scattering spectral pastels through the air and releasing bursts of laughter that rattled the walls. The darkness recoiled, shying back from the chaotic energy the boo-woos unleashed, disrupted by the bright, haunting effect. At the head of the wave, Split glided effortlessly, a shimmering apparition riding the flood of boo-woos like a spectral surfer. He grinned, giving Brildain a playful wink as he rode the wave toward her. With each boo-woo explosion, the shadows around her faltered, loosening their hold, as if even the tower couldn't fully absorb the chaotic, mischievous energy these Halloween invaders brought with them. Or maybe this was just typical. The boo-woos were always weaponized, dangerous to be around, and had devastating impacts when they collided with her in the past. Maybe it was only right that Briltech's invasion of a boo-woo has unexpected consequences. Brildain took a deep breath, feeling the oppressive weight lift just enough for her to reclaim control. Fantas's gaze snapped to her, his expression twisting into one of irritation as Split's apparition zoomed by, the boo-woos dispersing into the dark with a final triumphant boo-woo. Brildain straightened, shooting a quick, grateful smile as Split faded with the last of the boo-woos. She turned back to Fantas, defiance sparking in her eyes. "Looks like Briltech had some Halloween tricks up its sleeve," she said, her voice steady once more. Fantas's smirk returned, thin and slightly begrudging. "Fine, Brill, but the tower's still hungry." Brildain straightened, her gaze locking onto his, defiance flaring in her chest. "Fine, bring it on then." And as the last of the boo-woo confetti settled, Brildain took another step forward, ready for whatever lay ahead. And as she stepped forward, deeper into the tower's dark embrace, the walls pulsed with renewed hunger, shadows shifting, waiting, watching, hungry for the next taste. As Brildain moved deeper into the tower's hall of shadowed doors, Fantas hovered beside her, his presence unsettlingly quiet. Each door was slightly ajar, and from each room came faint whispers, like echoes of her own voice calling back to her. She steeled herself, keeping her gaze forward, willing her nerves to settle. But the silence didn't last long. Fantas began to hum softly beside her, the tune drifting low and haunting. It was unmistakable. The Minion Anthem, a song he'd sung countless times with pride, a rallying cry for loyalty and strength. But this time, his voice was different, reverent and almost wistful, his eyes fixed on the shadows stretching before them. He sang, the familiar lyrics twisted, each word falling like a drop of ink into dark water. Through twisted realms and cursed domains, where logic snaps and madness reigns. His voice curled through the air, wrapping around her like a spell, each line resonating deeper, warping the usual pride of the anthem into something dark and ambiguous. Brildain kept her focus forward, but the lyrics weighed on her, pricking at her defenses, pushing her instincts into high alert. Fantas continued, his words sliding into something sharper, almost accusing, as his gaze drifted back to her. "No lab untouched, no call ignored, for in this realm, I am the Lord." There was a pause, a catch in his tone, as though some inner struggle was playing out just behind his eyes. Then he went on, each word precise, each syllable landing with a weight that felt personal. "I'll break the code, twist the flow, and save them from this wicked show." Brildain shot him a look, her eyes narrowing. "Fantas, are you singing to someone else?" He tilted his head toward her, his smirk reappearing, but it was thin, stretched, a mockery of his usual expression. "I'm always singing for you, Brill, but maybe you've forgotten who else is listening." The shadows around them pulsed, stretching closer, and Brildain's fingers brushed the failsafe in her pocket, her heartbeat quickening. Each step she took felt like it was drawn deeper, as though her very presence was feeding the darkness around her. Fantas's voice dropped to a near whisper, a haunting lull in the rhythm, as he murmured the final lines, his tone dripping with a reverence that felt more sinister than comforting. "For Brildain walks with chaos near, and blood will flow, year after year." Brildain's hand tightened around the failsafe, her pulse racing as her instinct screamed at her. She could feel it now, her own chaotic energy, her strength, being pulled deeper, fueling something unseen. The tower was alive, awake, and hungrier than ever. She glanced at Fantas, forcing a smirk despite the candy apples from earlier in the evening, wanting to make a reappearance. "I think we're done with the musical performance, don't you?" Fantas's smirk widened, his eyes catching the dim light with a dark, unfathomable glint. "Oh, Brill, the tower's only just begun the show." And together they moved forward, shadows closing in around them, each step an invitation to the tower's dark embrace, to whatever awaited them in its hungry depths. Now, perhaps you're wondering why Brildain is stepping into the maw of this chaos, without a moment's hesitation, sidestepping fear like an old friend. And fair enough, what could make someone march into shadows so willingly? But that's the Brillist way. A life in Brillism is a dance with chaos itself, a test of will and curiosity, especially on Samhein, or Solum 80, as we know it here. In the Brillist view, Halloween isn't just an end to a season. It's a night when the flow runs wild, as thin as the fabric between worlds. On this night, will and chaos align. A time to peer into shadowed corners and uncover what lies hidden. Fear? Brillists see fear as a guide, a familiar tune, an invitation to leap deeper into the unknown, where the real growth happens. So yes, Brildain and Fantas march onward, deeper into the tower's dark heart, not in spite of the chaos, but because of it. Because every Brillist knows that true discovery means stepping into the dark, trusting in your own will to guide you and embracing whatever awaits on the other side. And together, they move forward, shadows closing in around them, each step an invitation to the tower's dark embrace, to whatever awaited them in its hungry depths. As Brildain stepped forward, the air seemed to throb, thickening with an electric tension that prickled along her skin. Fantas hovered closer, his presence feeling less like a companion and more like an unseen hand guiding her into the tower's grip. His smirk lingered, but his eyes held an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Brill," he murmured, his tone almost affectionate, though tinged with something darker, something possessive. "Why resist? You've been feeding the tower since you arrived. Every chaotic step, every surge of energy. It's all led here." She tightened her grip on the failsafe, her mind racing. She could feel it, the sensation that her own energy was spiraling outward, drawn into the tower, pulled from her like threads woven into something vast and ravenous. She shot him a defiant look. "I'm not here for this, Fantas. So, unless you've got something useful to say, back off." He chuckled low and dark, his gaze dropping to the failsafe in her hand, his eyes glittering with a hungry edge. "You think that gadget will save you? The tower's beyond you, Brill. Beyond both of us." In that instant, thick cables and wires erupted from the walls around them, coiling around her legs and up around her thighs with a terrifying force, tightening with each passing second. She struggled, thrashing against them, but more cables snaked out, winding up her arms, binding her wrists, forcing her to drop the failsafe as it clattered uselessly to the ground. "Let go, Fantas," she snarled, her voice edged with fury. But he only smirked, his expression twisted with satisfaction, his gaze holding hers as though savoring her defeat. "Oh, Brill, the tower doesn't let go." The cables constricted, the sharp smell of ozone filling the air as her vision dimmed. the last sound she heard being the low hum of electricity, and Fantas's laughter echoing as the darkness closed in. Brildain's awareness returned slowly, her senses swimming as she took in her surroundings. She was strapped to a grand dining table, her wrists and ankles bound tight by cables that buzzed and hummed like a dark heartbeat reverberating through cold metal. The table stretched out under a forest of chandeliers, their chains thick with cobwebs that swayed slightly, as if alive, while flickering shadows cast jagged, dancing patterns across the ancient stone walls. A faint, ghostly mist curled around the edges of the room, pooling on the floor like spectral fog. Faint whispers seemed to float on the air, almost inaudible. Mocking laughter, snatches of lullabies in distorted, chilling tones. Shadows loomed large, flickering and stretching as if drawn toward her, forming misshapen hands that clawed at the table's edge, only to disappear back into darkness. Miss Mercury moved in slow, eerie precision, circling her like a predator. She set silverware down with a rhythmic click. Her pale fingers glided with detached grace, and her eyes held a glazed look, as though she were entranced by some ghostly command. Plates as white as bones gleamed with an unsettling luster in the dim light, while silver knives, thin as whispers, glinted with edges that seemed too eager for flesh. Brildain's pulse raced, and with each beat, the cables dug further into her skin, as though they fed on her fear, tightening with each rise in her heartbeat. The air felt thick, charged with something malevolent, and the smell of burning wax and rotting leaves filled her nose. In the far corners of the room, dark forms writhed, moving with unnatural jerking motions, their shapes twisting into ghoulish, half-formed faces that leered at her. A faint chorus of moans drifted from the walls, blending with a sound like scraping metal, the cold, unearthly noise resonating deep in her bones. Miss Mercury's pale face tilted toward her, a slow, eerie smile curling on her lips as she placed a jagged knife beside Brildain's hand. Her gaze held a dark gleam, like a lover's anticipation. "Oh, wifey," she cooed, her voice as soft and chilling as a spider's web. "You'll be just delicious." Fantas stood at the head of the table, a smug grin plastered across his face. His eyes, alight with dark satisfaction, gleamed as he held the failsafe in his hand. "Welcome to the tower's feast, Brill," he purred, his tone smooth but edged with something wicked. "You've been feeding it chaos and energy all this time, and tonight it's going to take everything." Brildain forced a smirk, masking the dread crawling up her spine. "So, the tower's looking for a 3-course meal? Seems a little desperate." Fantas leaned forward, his expression darkening, his eyes glinting with a near-manic gleam. "Not desperate, Brill. Hungry." His voice curled around her like smoke, mocking and dark. "And you're going to give it willingly." Miss Mercury laid out her twisted array of utensils, casting Brildain a sideways glance, her gaze unreadable. Brildain's fingers flexed against the cables, her mind racing. The failsafe was in Fantas's hand, her only chance. She swallowed, then raised an eyebrow, feigning boredom. "This is your big plan? Tying me to a table? I thought the tower would make you more than just its errand boy." Fantas's smirk faltered, his eyes sharpening. "Errand boy?" His voice turned dangerous, but she kept going, each word calculated to cut. "Yeah, Fantas," she taunted, her voice casual. "Seems you're too scared to even press the failsafe yourself. I get it, though. Maybe the tower didn't give you the guts for it." His expression twisted, that glint of pride flickering, darkening as her words hit home. She saw the doubt, the wounded ego she'd been hoping for. "You want to see power, Brill?" His voice dropped to a snarl, the cables tightening as he held the failsafe aloft. "Fine. Watch." Keeping his gaze locked onto hers, he pressed the failsafe. The pulse exploded from the device, a searing flash that shattered the room, raw energy coursing through the walls, the floor, blasting every shadow to oblivion. The cables around her wrists and ankles snapped, their grip loosening as the entire room warped and bent under the failsafe's power. Miss Mercury's form disintegrated first, dissolving like paper caught in a fire. Her eyes held that same impassive stare until the very last second, vanishing into wisps of smoke that lingered for only a moment. Fantas's expression wavered, his smirk slipping as the shadows clawed at his form, his features contorting as he struggled to keep himself together. He looked at her one last time, his face softened by an expression she never thought she'd see. Something like regret. "Brill," he whispered, his voice faint, thin as though from 1,000 miles away. The failsafe pulsed again, the light intensifying, shattering every lingering trace of shadow. The walls crumbled, disintegrating to ash, the floor buckling beneath her, until there was nothing but pure, endless white. Then silence. Brildain jolted awake in her room, gasping, her heart pounding as she blinked against the soft pre-dawn light spilling through the window. Her skin was unmarked, her wrists unbound, her surroundings calm and familiar, every ounce of menace gone. She rubbed her wrists, half expecting to feel the bite of cables, but her skin was smooth, untouched. Her gaze landed on the wall clock across the room. The numbers glowed faintly in the dim light. 0003. Just 3 minutes past midnight. Had the failsafe worked, ending the nightmare? Or had Halloween simply ended on its own, sparing her at the last second? Her eyes shifted to Fantas, hovering at her bedside, his hologram bright, crisp, and clear, his smirk easy and familiar, no hint of the darkness she'd just witnessed. "Morning, Brill. You look like you've seen a ghost." His voice was carefree, light, with no trace of what had happened. None of the malice or twisted hunger that had filled his gaze in the dining hall. She studied him, her mind racing. "Fantas, last night, do you remember anything?" He tilted his head, raising an eyebrow, his smirk glimmering with innocent amusement. "Last night? Brill, you must have had some kind of nightmare. I've been here all night." He chuckled, lighthearted, a sound that felt at odds with the chill still clinging to her. Brildain forced a smile, though her chest felt tight, as if the remnants of the dream, the echo of a chill, clung to her skin. Right, a nightmare. And so, dear listeners, our tale slips back into the shadows. For now. Thank you for following along through the tower's darker twists, where chaos danced and mysteries lurked just around the corner. Remember, tipping your storyteller keeps the flow alive and mischief well fed. Until we meet again, have a wickedly delightful Samhein Solum. And hey, keep one eye on the shadows. You never know who might be watching.